Now, as a dire situation persists in Ukraine, there are growing concerns that Vladimir Putin may be readying to launch a nuclear attack in response to the recent success of the war-torn nation. NATO has been urged to take a stronger stand against Russia or risk an increasingly barbaric war. Well, joining us now, someone who knows all about this conflict and many others, former British commander Richard Kemp, Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, great to see you as always. You've written some terrific articles recently in the UK Telegraph about what Putin is up to, his weapon of mass destruction, his environmental terrorism, and this bizarre story of the Iranian kamikaze drones. So, Richard, talk to us about where we are currently with the war and the major threats that you see coming, that do affect the rest of the West.
Well, I think, the drone question is an important one because it doesn't just affect Ukraine, of course, it affects the whole world because it has indicated something we hadn't really appreciated before, which was the full extent of the new axis of evil that exists between Russia and Iran. And Iran have been supplying thousands, now are contracted to supply 3,000 drones and then ballistic missiles on top of that to Ukraine to carry out attacks against, to Russia to carry out attacks against Ukrainian citizens. And we've seen these taking place. The Ukrainians have been quite successful at shooting them down, but nevertheless, many have got through and they've caused severe damage not only to the population, but also to infrastructure, including energy infrastructure there. And there have been Iranians operating some of these drones and teaching the Russians how to operate the drones. So it's a worrying thing. And I think one other dimension to it that we obviously don't really have a handle on right now, but may get, is that President Zelensky in Ukraine has suggested that it may be that part of the deal that went into supplying these drones was that Russia would help would help Iran with weaponization of its nuclear weapons program, which is something that it direly needs to do in order to get a viable nuclear weapon. So I think, the combination, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Zelensky is right. So I think, the combination of those various factors should ring very, very severe alarm bells for the whole world. And beyond that, we've got in overall terms, the conflict has been relatively slow on the ground in recent days and weeks since the Ukrainians launched a major offensive in the east and again in the south. We've seen Russia reeling under these offensives. We've seen Russian mobilization, but not yet really kicked in to the extent that the Russians are able to fight back effectively against the Ukrainian advances. So and as winter is setting in there now, I think we might see significant offensives by either side, but I think it's more likely to go relatively slow over the winter period.
James.
Well, so Colonel Kemp, where does this then go? Can you take us forward to what does the end game for this war look like? Because you just flagged that winter is coming and that there could be, a long, cold, difficult stalemate sort of situation playing out there over the coming months. What is the end here? Is there any negotiated settlement that can be made with Russia, or does this have to end, as some people say, with actually Putin being removed from office?
Well, I don't see that there can be a negotiation. Putin is not going to negotiate to withdraw, shall we say, from Ukraine, even from the south and the east where he made advances in since this war began, let alone the Crimea, which he seized in 2014. He's simply not going to be doing that. And nor is Zelensky, in my view, likely, certainly at this stage, to come to any agreement that involves Russia holding onto that territory. So the reality is, I think both sides are going to continue fighting. Russia's building up its forces with mobilization. We've seen 300,000 Russians in mobilization now, although that doesn't necessarily translate into a huge number of combat forces on the ground. And if there are, whatever there are not going to be well trained or, well prepared to fight effectively in Ukraine. So I don't think Russia's going to be able to make major steps forward. Ukraine, I think we should be concerned about because they've been fighting very hard and they've taken very, very severe casualties. and they're heavily dependent on Western support from Europe and the United States in particular. And that support, I believe, is beginning to wane. I hope I'm wrong in that assessment. But I think as we get into the winter, and particularly in Europe, countries in Europe suffer increasingly from energy shortages and higher energy prices and general cost of living prices as a result, to a very large extent, of this war. I think, those politicians who want to support Ukraine are going to be under greater and greater pressure from their people to maybe not to do so. And Ukraine is completely dependent on that support. So I think, again, we see what happens in the midterm elections and what effect that might or might not have on American support. But Americans equally, are suffering gas prices, etc., as a result of the conflict.